All right, so I'll read from the new book, Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom. See, guess you can. I think I'll read, I wrote, it takes me almost 2 years to write a book. So when I wrote this, we weren't under a pandemic and there was no people staying at home. The cloud of doom was just sort of this amorphous thing out there. But when the book was published, here we were all under a cloud of doom. And I will read a story about, well, I'll just read it and you'll understand. But it's after the cloud of doom has appeared and things have started to go wrong. Chapter 11, what's the point? In some classrooms, teachers choose the weekly spelling words. Not so in Mrs. Jules' class. She lets her students pick. Nearly everyone had a hand raised. Mrs. Jules called on Rondi. Pistachios, said Rondi. This is why other teachers don't let their students choose the words. Mrs. Jules couldn't spell pistachios. So she did what every teacher everywhere does in such situations. That's an excellent word, Rondi, she said. Would you like to come write it on the board? Rondi came to the front of the room. Mrs. Jules paid close attention as Rondi wrote pistachios on the blackboard. I love pistachios, said Kathy when Rondi returned to her seat. Me too, said Allison. They're my third favorite nut. Mrs. Jules called on DJ. Grumple, he said. I don't think grumple is a word, Mrs. Jules pointed out. So, asked DJ, we should still know how to spell it. It might become a word someday, Kathy agreed. Mrs. Jules wrote grumple under pistachios. Joy raised her hand. A, she suggested. A what? Asked Mrs. Jules. Just A, said Joy. Don't you think that's a little too easy? It's a very common word, said Kathy. It's important that we all know how to spell it. Mrs. Jules couldn't argue with that. She added A to the list. Myron had his hand raised. Yes, Myron, asked Mrs. Jules. What's the point? Asked Myron. That's 3 words, said Mrs. Jules. And all good ones, too, chirped Kathy. The cloud of doom is getting bigger every day, Myron exclaimed. What does it matter if we can spell? So we can read and write, Mrs. Jules replied. What's the point of reading? Asked Leslie. What's the point of writing? Asked Jason. What's the point of arithmetic? Asked Benjamin. There is no point, Myron grumbled. He slammed his pencil down hard on his desk. The point broke off of it. I understand you're scared and upset, said Mrs. Jules. But what's the point of quitting? We can all just sit around and grumble, or we can try to do our best, cloud or no cloud. And it hasn't been all that bad, Mrs. Jules continued. We've been getting a whole lot more nail clippings. I should take a point, do a little bit of an explanation here. The class is trying to collect 1 million nail clippings. That was true. Ever since the cloud of doom appeared, everyone's fingernails and toenails have been growing a lot faster. They had to be clipped 3 or 4 times a week. The number on the board was now 19,457. Someday, the cloud of doom will be gone, said Mrs. Jules, and the world will be a much better place, even better than before the cloud. Colors will be more colorful, music will be more musical, even Miss Mush's food will taste good. The bigger the storm, the brighter the rainbow. At that moment, a crack of thunder shook the classroom and the lights went out. The children screamed. They weren't scared. They just liked screaming in the dark. Mrs. Jules lit a candle and everyone settled down. Now shall we continue with our spelling? Jenny raised her hand and suggested hope. Excellent word, said Mrs. Jules. She held her candle in one hand and the chalk in the other. She said the letters out loud as she wrote them on the blackboard. H-O-P-E.
Yay.
Yeah, it's funny reading to a group and not being able to hear any reactions. So I wrote my first Sideways Stories book after I graduated college. And when I was going to college, I got extra credit for helping out in a nearby local elementary school. And I had such a great time with the kids, that's what made me want to try writing a children's book. And so all the kids in Wayside School were actually all named after kids I knew on the playground and in the classroom. And I'm still writing about them today. And in real life, those kids are probably about 50 years old. It's pretty amazing. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask me? I don't know how I call on me, but I'll let Megan read the chat questions.
Yeah, let me find one. There are a lot. Okay, so AJ, age 11, from Garrison, North Dakota. What are your characters based off of? I think you sort of started to answer that a little bit.
Yeah, they were based off the kids I knew when I went to the school that I helped out at was called Hillside School. And besides helping out in the classroom, I also helped out on the playground. And the kids all called me Louis the yard teacher. So that's why Louis the yard teacher is in the books as well.
Okay, Laura is a third grade teacher from San Diego. She says her students all love the Wayside School books. How did you come up with the Tower of Classrooms?
Yeah, the school I worked at wasn't a tower. The fun thing about writing is how one idea leads to another, and then when you that idea suddenly opens up a whole new ideas. And so when I first started writing Sideways Stories, it was just a regular school. But then I had the idea for the kid who falls out the window, and it wouldn't make a very good story if she just fell out of a one-story window. So I had to think of a way to make it a real tall school. And that led to this magical place.
Very cool. Okay, Susan Brandon from Atlanta, Georgia. She wants to know what inspired your newest book.
The newest book, Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom. I don't know. I just thought it was time to try to go revisit the kids at Wayside. Little did I know that that it would be published during this time when we're all under a cloud of doom.
All right, just scrolling through, there are tons of comments here, just from people all over the country saying how much they love your books. Okay, Sam has a question. He says, in Holes, when they are climbing God's thumb, Stanley tosses Zero an onion. Zero asks what it is, and Stanley says, it's an ice cream sundae, just eat it. Zero then replies, that's the sweetest onion I've ever had. If Zero did not recognize the food as an onion, and it did not taste like an onion, how did he figure out what it was?
Um, he knows it. He could tell it was an onion. Um, I think he says it's the sweetest onion I ever had because he's been living in the desert, for 2 or 3 days eating nothing but sploosh. So even an onion tasted good to him, but he knew it was an onion. Um, and they happened to be very good onions. In the movie, by the way, they used apples and made them look like onions. So the characters in the movie the actors were actually biting into apples.
How much involvement did you have in the movie adaptation of Holes?
Well, I wrote the script, and I was on the set most of the time, and I just had a great time watching everyone work. Um, but occasionally, I would point things out to the director, and, make some suggestions. But he was so busy, I kind of learned to pick my battles. Um, I was also in the movie. There's a quick 2-second thing where Sam sells me onion juice to pour on my head to make my hair grow.
Okay. We have Axel from New York City saying that they're huge fans and talking about your audio recordings. Are all your books on audio, and do you read the new book?
Yeah, the new book. Pretty much all my books have been on audio. Maybe not some of my older ones. I'm not sure. I'd say I've done about 2/3 of them, and they've gotten professional readers to do maybe a third of them. Because when I do them, it's really tough. Yeah, I sit in this little booth, reading the book with, headphones on, not seeing anyone. And since I'm not a professional reader, I make lots of mistakes, and there's somebody checking. And so I probably end up rereading every sentence about 2 or 3 times by the time I finish reading the book. And my throat's dry, and it's hard to keep the emotion up. But I still like it when I read it. Sometimes I'll listen to other people read my books, and I'll cringe at parts, like because they put the wrong emphasis on the sentence or something.
Okay, Megan Price. She says her 4th grade class has read Wayside School, and she would like to know what book from your childhood has shaped you most as a writer, and if you have any advice to young writers.
Well, my favorite book from my childhood is Charlotte's Web.
Oh.
I love that book. I think E.B. White's a great writer. And I think, every book that has meant something to me has shaped me as a writer in one way or another. For advice, it's really hard to know. I don't, sometimes when I would visit schools or something, they would want me to teach a writing workshop or something. And I really don't know how to teach writing, especially to young kids who are first starting out. For me, I became a good writer when I learned how to rewrite. I rewrite all my stories 6 or 7 times. But I know kids don't like doing that. And I'm not even sure it's something I want to push that hard, because I don't want to take the fun out of writing. But for me, the fun actually is in the rewrites.
Interesting. Okay, so Courtney is a librarian in Austin. She says she grew up reading your books. Why did you choose to revisit Wayside School?
Well, it's always been one of my most popular books, right after Holes. And also, as I've gotten older, I'm feeling less in touch with what kids do these days. You know, I have a grown-up daughter who doesn't have children. Um, so I just have a hard time now coming up with just how kids do what they do when they hang out, what they say. But I'm still very familiar with the kids at Wayside School, so I figured I could go back to them and revisit them.
All righty. Laura, who's also a teacher, wants to know if you've come up with any new ideas or topics for new books since you've been in quarantine.
Well, if I did, I wouldn't really talk about it. I never talk about anything I'm working on. But the thing about the quarantine is it makes it hard to write because it takes me, like I mentioned, about 2 years to write a book, and then maybe another year or two for it to be published. And so it's, you know, the times are just changing so fast now. No one knows what the world's going to be like in 3 years. And so it's really hard to try to write a contemporary story um, that may not make sense 3 years from now. And it seems to me like writing about people stuck in quarantine. Well, first of all, I think there'll be a lot of books like that. And second of all, I'm not sure it'll be all that interesting to kids 5 years from now when it's just something from the past.
Makes sense. Let's see if I can scroll through here and find any other questions. Okay, Kayleen wants to know how you got started being an author.
I just started writing. I mean, that's kind of one of the good things about being an author. You can just start. You don't have to get hired first. So I graduated college and thought I'd try writing a children's book. I didn't know if it would ever get published. And I had another job. I was working in a sweater warehouse. And I was writing at night. I'd picture the kids in Wayside, at Hillside, actually, in my mind and make up stories about them. And then when I finished, then I sent the manuscript to lots of different publishers, hoping someone would publish it. And I really didn't know if it would ever be published. I think it's very hard as a writer to get published, and then even if once your book is published, to make a living at it. So I had other jobs at first, and just did it because it was something I enjoyed doing.
Kayleen also wants to know if you still work other jobs and what other hobbies do you have?
I don't do any other jobs. My main hobby these days is I play a card game called Bridge, and it's a very complex game. I love it. In fact, I have a book called The Card Turner, which has a lot to do about bridge, but it's a story. It's not a bridge book. But so just like everyone else, I'm stuck at home, and you can no longer go to my bridge clubs or bridge tournaments, but there's these bridge sites where you can all get together and play online. So I've been doing that a lot.
Nice. Okay, Jacob and Max want to know what gave you the idea for the Cloud of Doom?
Well, there was a lot going on, I mean, I wasn't too thrilled about the election outcome of 2016, and that kind of felt like a cloud of doom to me. And then my mother came down with Alzheimer's, so that's also a cloud of doom. And so I just tried to take those feelings and put them into something kind of tangible and make fun of it a little bit rather than worry about it.
Let's see. Spencer wants to know, how old were you when you started writing books?
I was 23. I had just graduated college. maybe 22 actually, when I first started, and finished it when I was 23.
So how old were you when the first book was published then? Like 24 or 25?
Let's see. Well, it would have been, yeah, probably 25.
Wow, that's young.
Yeah, it's been an odd thing. I used to go to these book conferences and I'd be the youngest author there. And then gradually and gradually, I'd be all these young authors now coming up, and I'm one of the old wise ones.
Well, your books are obviously still really relevant. Let's see. Okay, here's a question from Asher from Albuquerque. Considering you've written the Wayside School books for such a long span of time, how do you keep the characters' voices and dynamics consistent with the previous books?
I feel like I know them. I mean, it's not just because I knew them as real kids at Hillside, because they've changed a lot. But, when I spend a year or two on a book, the book becomes a part of me. And so even though it had been actually 25 years since the last Wayside book, the fact that I'd already written 3 of them, I just felt like I knew those kids. And they're still my friends.
Okay, Maddie from Pennsylvania wants to know if you plan to write any more books. We hope.
I hope. I'm happiest when I'm in the middle of a book. Gives kind of purpose of my life to get up and go exercise and then come and write for 2 hours every morning, sitting at this desk right here. And when I'm not doing that, it kind of feels like I'm just spinning my wheels, playing bridge, playing games on the computer, talking to friends. But so I like having that purpose of working on a book, and then it just absorbs me when I'm working. It becomes my reason to get up every morning and reason to wait, to be anticipating the next day. So, but it's hard to get started. So I don't know when I'm going to start my next one.
Melissa says that your new book is dedicated to Ruth, and she would like to know, who is Ruth?
Ruth is my mother that I mentioned, who now has Alzheimer's.
Okay, let's see. Samantha wants to know, Samantha's from New York. She says, why did you stop writing the series after book 3?
Well, it was never my intention to write a series. And one of the things I like about writing is that I get to explore myself in different ways with each book. Each book I try to be original and try to challenge myself in different ways. And so from the very beginning, the Wayside School books were by far my most popular. And people were always asking for more Wayside School. But that wasn't why I wanted to be a writer. It was just to write a series. So I did other books, and some did well, like There's a Boy in the Girl's Bathroom, and some have kind of faded. And then I wrote Holes, which surprised me that it actually became more popular than Wayside School. But I like trying and doing different things.
Okay, let's see. One person wants to know how you liked the treatment of the movie Holes.
Well, I liked it very much, and I was surprised I liked it, even though I wrote it. And I was on the set the whole time. I still didn't expect to like it, just because I never liked movies based on books that I've read, that I like. But I really did. I liked it a lot. Let me try to show you something here. Just see if this works. If it doesn't, tell me. But I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this picture here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so this was designed by the set designer before the movie of Holes was made. And it's a map of where each hole was dug and how deep it had to be. Because, you know, you might notice, I mean, if you took the time to look at this, some of the configurations of where the holes are identical in some places compared to others, but in some places they're maybe a foot deep, and elsewhere they're 4 feet deep, depending on how long they supposedly have been digging. So oops, I just lost everyone. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can still see you.
Huh, I'm not seeing anything. But anyway, as long as you can see me. Yeah, so they had all the holes pre-dug, and each to different depths, and then, you know, and each was marked for a different scene. So on the scene where they're just starting out, this is the, you know, these are the holes you're going to use, and for the scene that you're almost finished, these are the holes you're going to use, and so forth.
Very cool.
I don't know why I'm not seeing, all I'm seeing is blank screen. But anyway, as long as you can see me.
There's a speaker view and then there's a gallery view. So the speaker view would just be you, and then there's another view where you can pull up everyone else.
Yeah, it's just not giving me any choices anywhere. It's just tries.
Let's see. Holden from San Diego would like to know, if you weren't an author, what other job would you have?
Well, I got a job. I went to law school, and because I knew, like I said, I never knew if I'd be able to make a living as a writer. So I guess I'd be a lawyer, but I wouldn't be a very happy one. I much prefer writing.
Logan wants to know, how did you do that mirror trick in your book?
Okay, I got this working now. I'm less. How did I do the mirror trick in my book? Well, that's the good thing about writing. You don't have to actually do it. You just write the words and say it's done.
All right. How much time did it take you to write your book?
I think Beneath the Cloud of Doom took almost 2 years. Because I really didn't know, you know, I just would, every morning would just try to kind of make up a story about the kids. And I had this vague idea about the Cloud of Doom, but I didn't have any of the stories planned beforehand, and then some of the stories I just ended up really liking and built on those, like the thing with, there are about 4 or 5 stories about the gong, and stories about the face that gets stuck, and the ultimate test. But when I first started, I didn't have all that planned. It was just different tidbits here and there. For instance, I began one story with Louis shoveling snow off the roof and never went anywhere, and I kind of quit that story. But then later on, I ended up using that in a different story.
Justice wants to know, how many books have you made?
I think there's been about 26.
Wow. Let's see. Why is Jackson Welch wants to know, why is the teacher named Ms. Jules?
Well, the real teacher that I helped, you know, when I helped out at a school and helped out in the classroom, her name was Mrs. Jukes. And I don't know, I guess I just decided I better change it so she doesn't sue me or something.
Okay, Jordan 10 from Pennsylvania asks, why no 19th floor?
It was just a whim. You know, like I mentioned, when I start a story, I just start trying to brainstorm ideas. And I remember with that story, I got the idea of I'll just begin with Mrs. Jules giving Calvin a note to take to a teacher. And I really didn't know what was going to happen. And I tried lots of different ideas. And then I got the idea, well, the teacher just doesn't exist and there is no 19th floor. And it makes no sense, but I thought I liked it the best.
Well, it's intriguing, that's for sure.
And then I had a friend of mine, this was years later, I mean, like maybe, 15 years ago, he told me this. He thought that the reason there was no 19th story was because when you, in the game of cribbage, it's also a card game, you score points depending on what cards you have in your hand, and you can score anywhere from 0 points up to like 28 or 29 is the maximum. But there's absolutely no way to score 19 points. It's the only number you can't score in the game of cribbage. But that's a coincidence. I didn't know that when I chose it.
Lily, age 10 from Albuquerque, wants to know, what's your favorite book you ever wrote?
It's real hard to pick a favorite. I spend 2 years or so working on the books, and with each book I put so much of myself into it that I can't pick one.
Let's see. Rivers, age 8 from Minnesota, wants to know, what was the 999-page book that Stephen read in the library chapter?
Yeah, I don't have a title for it.
These kids are paying a good attention to the detail. You can see. Let's see. How did you come up with the name Mrs. Zarves? This is coming from Maya, age 9 from Massachusetts.
Well, I can give you the answer. You're going to think it's kind of weird. Back when I was a kid, this is a true story of how I came up with it. Back when I was a kid, my brother and I used to play the game Ghost. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's where somebody says a letter and somebody else has to say another letter, and you try not to say the last letter of a word. If you spell a word, you get a G and then an H and then an O, and you don't want those. So there weren't that many words we knew that began with the letter Z. So one day I looked in the dictionary and saw that there was a word called Zarf, Z-A-R-F, which was a kind of wine glass or something. So next time I played a game with my brother, he said Z, I said A, and he challenged me because he said there is no word or whatever, and I said, Zarf. And so then when I wrote the book, I decided I'd make a plural out of Zarf and called it Zarves. But it's just a made-up word. I don't think that's the real. Just
made up is not a word.
Echo just spoke to me.
How does it feel that your books are so different from each other?
Well, I'm glad you said that. It's because I don't want to just redo the same thing over and over again. I try to challenge myself in different ways with each book.
All right. One person wants to know, why is Kathy so mean?
That just became her personality in the first book. But so in the new one, she goes to Dr. Pickle and he makes her nice.
All right, here's a question from Copeland in Albuquerque. You've released about 3 books over the last decade. Do you write more books than these and not release some? And if so, how do you decide which books to publish?
No, I just don't, I'm just not as, I used to be when I was younger, I would be writing a book every year or every 2 years. And I'm just not, just haven't, I guess, don't have the inspiration, or maybe I'm feeling like I have to make each book special now, and because I have this reputation, and but for whatever reason, it takes me longer to write a book. It used to take me about a year to write a book. Um, Now it takes more like 2, and it takes me longer to get started. But once I start a book and put all that time and effort into it, uh, I certainly would want to release it. There aren't any books just sitting around that I haven't released.
Okay, one teacher wants to know if you do school visits or Skype visits. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that could happen.
Well, I don't really do that. I used to, again, when I was younger, I did a lot of school visits, and um, I would say, oh, people would call and say, oh yeah, I could go there, I could go there. And I'd look at my calendar and think, oh, I've got the free time there. But suddenly then when the time came to do it, it would be suddenly every week I'd end up going somewhere, and it takes a day to get there, and maybe spend 2 days there and a day to get back. And suddenly there was no time to write. So I finally just had to stop and just say, no, I can't do this anymore.
All right. Rebecca wants to know what elementary school you went to.
I went to Barnum Woods in East Meadow, New York for first, second, and third grade. And then we moved to California, and I went to Red Hill School there. And there's a boy in the girls' bathroom. Bradley goes to Red Hill School.
All righty. Grace wants to know, why are there 3 Erics?
Because there were 3 Erics in the classroom I helped out in.
It's a popular name in the 70s or 80s.
I guess so. Yeah, it was 1976 or 75 and 76 that I helped out in that classroom.
Kelly Cook wants to know, who is your favorite Wayside School student?
I don't know. In each book, different ones stand out. I think in the new one, it's either Kathy or probably Kathy. But she certainly wasn't my favorite in the earlier ones.
Charlotte from New Jersey wants to know, what inspired you to write Holes?
I had been writing books for a while, and they'd all taken place in schools or classrooms, and I guess reached a point where I think I can't write another book about kids in school. So I tried to come up with something different, and then I got the idea for a detention camp for bad kids, and I thought that'd be a great setting for a story. And when I work on a book, it took me almost 2 years to write Holes. When I work on it, I don't talk about it with anyone. No one, not even my wife or my agent or my editor, know what I'm working on. And my daughter was like in 4th grade about the time that I was working on that. And we went and visited San Francisco and went to Alcatraz, the island and the prison. And she found it really fascinating. She loved being there, learning about all the criminals who had been there. And it just made me feel good inside, saying, oh, good, she's going to like this book then. But I still didn't tell her I was writing what the book was going to be about.
So you don't tell anyone?
I don't tell anyone. Now, I find that by not talking about it, it just grows inside me. It's just like this becomes, like I said, becomes a part of me just bursting to get out. And the only way it can get out is by me writing it. So it gives me the energy to write it.
That makes sense. Okay, Ella Marie wants to know, how do you get such funny ideas?
From sitting at my boring desk, trying to come up with something and keeping myself entertained. The funny thing is, I forget what parts are funny. You know, everyone's like, recently I read Wayside School I went to the same school where my daughter went. And, you know, it was like one of the few school visits I did, and just went in and talked about the new book, and hadn't even been published yet, and read them a couple of chapters. And I was shocked at the places they laughed, because I just forgot that was a funny part. Because, I rewrite and rewrite the book so many times. And in the end, the final revisions, I'm just trying to, get the sentencing right, get the quickness and the pace right, and kind of forget that, what's funny. I mean, some parts I know are funny, but other parts I forget.
Mrs. Wessel's grade 2 in New York has been reading your series. She's been reading your series to her class for 13 years. She's always wondered if there was any special significance to the bald men and the man with the attaché case.
No, they were just kind of these mysterious men who showed up in the first book. So now they show up in all the books. They're just sort of this, I don't know, they're kind of, I kind of see them as like the overlords of the school or something.
Brenda Parada from El Paso says, my students loved when we were given apples during breakfast. How did you come up with the ideas of turning the students into apples?
Well, in the old days, even before, I mean, this was before before I went to school, but supposedly in the old days, kids would bring apples to their teachers. It was kind of this thing that kids supposedly did once upon a time, although I don't really know of any kid who ever did it. And so so I had her turn the kids into apples because she was such a mean teacher. No one ever brought her apples.
Ashley Aria wants to know, did Wayside School really fall down?
Well, no, if you read the book, you'll find out what actually happened to it.
Let's see. A lot of these are repeats, asking about your inspiration for Holes. Where do you get your funny ideas? Let's see.
I'll just talk a little bit more about getting my ideas, because when I mentioned I do lots of rewrites. In the first draft, I'm just trying to figure out the story, and I get ideas, and a lot of the ideas will go nowhere, and then I'll add some ideas at the end that really don't make any sense to what I began with. But then I rewrite it a second time and try to put everything in the right order now. But I'm still adding new ideas all the time, and ideas lead to other ideas. And then I'll rewrite it a third time, and then a fourth time, and then a fifth time. So I'm constantly adding and changing the ideas around. And so by the time the book is finished, it's really impossible for me to even say how I thought of what.
Let's see. Lucy from Massachusetts says, I heard the names of the mean teachers of Wayside have wacky names, but when you spell them backwards, they are like animals. Example, Mrs. Gorf is Mrs. Frog. How did you come up with this?
I've always liked wordplay. And so, yeah, Mrs. Gorf was frog backwards. And so then when I did the book with all the substitute teachers, I had Mrs. Drizzle, which is lizard backwards, and Mrs. Nogard, which is dragon backwards. And in the new book, we find out more about the librarian at Wayside School, and her name is Mrs. Surlaw. I'll let you figure out what that is.
I'm not sure the spelling's that good.
Surlaw.
All right. Ella Marie wants to know, who is your favorite author?
It's hard.
Some of the authors you like? I know you mentioned E.B. White.
Well, E.B. White was my favorite children's book author. Then growing up, I really liked J.D. Salinger and Kurt Vonnegut, John Steinbeck. But there are a lot of authors I like. It's hard to pick a favorite. But the ones who were my inspiration in when I was a kid was E.B. White, and in high school, what made me want to be a writer were like J.D. Salinger and Kurt Vonnegut.
The excuse me, the Catalano family wants to know if it was hard to write a Wayside book after so many years.
All books are hard. It was a challenge, and it had the added pressure is, I get lots and lots of mail from people, who read books as, when they were kids, they wrote me, and now teachers tell me that they read them as kids and are now teaching them to their class. And I meet teachers all the time and meet people who have potato tattoos on them. So I did feel a lot of pressure. I thought, I wanted, I really hoped I'd be able to not disappoint all those fans.
Ari in Nevada wants to know if you ever thought that your book series would get this big.
No, I was just happy that my first book got published.
Abigail and Morgan want to know if any of your stories are real.
No, none of my books are real.
All right. What about Mr. Pickle? Where did you get the idea for Mr. Pickle? Rebecca Jackson is asking.
Trying to think how I got that idea. Really can't remember how I thought of Dr. Pickle. I'm trying to think I must have had the idea for him to be at the school, and then I made up the backstory. But then once he got to the school, he ended up not really doing all that much. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I really don't remember how I thought up Dr. Pickle.
Let's see. One person wants to know how you can tap into such different sides of yourself. You write funny stories in Wayside School, and then you write with depth and holes. How do you tap into both sides of yourself?
Well, I write for about an hour to 2 hours every morning. And when I'm it takes me like 2 years, like I said, to write a book, and I do it every day, come back to it every day. So it's kind of it's almost like after I've been working on a book a while, it's like I just get into a certain zone and I'm just there. And at first it's hard. At first, I don't know what I'm doing, and am I ever even going to finish this book? And I feel like I'm an outsider to it. But after a while, I'm just right there, and just becomes a part of me.
So do you write every morning or every day? Do you have a schedule?
Well, when I'm working on a book, yeah, I write every Monday through Friday. I did that because there'd be too many distractions initially on Saturday and Sunday, but now I've just gotten used to it. I think it's probably good to let my mind rest for a couple of days.
Yeah. All right, Jenny Clark wants to know if you're in touch with any of the students that you based your characters off of.
No, I'm not. I've never heard from any one of them. I don't know if they know about the book. I think they probably do, because I've heard from people um, who knew about Hillside School have contacted me. So I would think the kids, maybe they know. I don't know. I haven't though. The teacher knows. Mrs. Jukes knew about it. I gave her a copy of the book.
Jewel wants to know, how do you write a good book?
Takes a lot of patience and perseverance. Like I said, I spend 2 years, and it's just not try to rush it. Just take my time, write a little bit each day, and try to be at my best for that 1 hour or 2 hours. And if I feel myself starting to fade a little bit, I don't push it. I quit for the day, and so that the next morning I'm fresh and ready to go again.
Rebecca wants to know if you're married and if you have children.
I'm married. My wife is Carla, who was the inspiration for There's a Boy in the Girls' Bathroom. And I have a daughter named Sherry, who's now 33 years old.
What book would you read over and over again?
Well, one book that I have over the years read over and over again was a book called 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. I've reread East of Eden by John Steinbeck.
I love that book.
Yeah. There've been a couple of other books I've reread, but usually I don't want to reread a book I've already read.
One person wants to know, who is Marvin Redpost, you or a friend?
Well, he's not based on anyone I know. I guess there's some of me in him, but I guess there's some of me in all my characters.
Molly wants to know what other jobs you had. Would you like to talk about any of those?
Well, I really haven't, you mentioned all these interesting jobs I had. I really haven't had that many.
The sweater factory or the sweater
I worked at a sweater warehouse right after college while I was writing sideways stories from Wayside School. And that didn't work out too well. I got fired from that job. And then I went to law school, and I heard from a publisher who wanted to publish the book during my first week at law school. So I went through a lot of angst about whether I wanted to finish law school or just concentrate on writing. But just because my book was getting published didn't mean I'd make any money at it. So I went to law school, finished it, continued writing, and did part-time legal work for about 8 years. And then after about 8 years, my books finally started selling. And I was able to make a living from my books, so I quit my doing any legal work. But it was all just part-time work.
Samantha in New York wants to know if writing was your favorite subject as a kid in school.
Probably not. I like math.
Really?
Yeah.
That's like bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
And a lot of my, math is very logical, and a lot of my humor is the illogic, is playing with logic.
One person wants to know, the Best family wants to know, how do you know when you were done writing a book after the revising? And are there any books that you wish you could revise again?
Just about every book, I wish I could make some changes to. No, I recently did the the audio version of Cloud of Doom, and there were parts I thought, oh, I need to change that, and they wouldn't let me because the book was already set for publication, and they couldn't even do it differently on the audio because even just one word different because sometimes there was a word left out, but the apparently, people often will listen to the audio as they read along, so it had to be exact.
Wow.
What was the other part of your question? I can't remember now.
Are there any of your books that you would want to revise if you were given the opportunity?
Yeah, so like I said, just about all of them. Oh, how I know I'm finished with the book. That's what it was. I never quite feel finished. But at some point, when I've rewritten a book 6 times, I can't even tell what it says anymore. And at that point, then I need to send it to I let my wife read it, I let my daughter read it, my brother, and then I send it to my agent and my publisher. And I'm anxious to get their feedback.
Would you be interested in making the Wayside movies into a book? Max wants to know from Texas.
You mean the books into a movie, or?
Yeah, the Wayside books into a movie.
There's been a lot of interest over the years. It's really hard to do though because it's not one long story, and there's no real central character. There's all these characters because they've tried to do it in the past, and they tried to make a cartoon show, but all these people at the movie studios and things, and TV studios, they said, well, you have to pick a core of 4 or 5 kids and have it be about them, and that just doesn't work for Wayside. And I think you have to be, whoever does it, if it's ever done, they have to be willing to think outside the box.
Okay, well, it looks like we're coming up pretty close on 4 o'clock. So I did want to just mention to everyone that you can find out more about Louis on his website, louissachar.com. You can also go to the Bookworks website and purchase the new Wayside School book from us or something else on there that you might love. Next Sunday, we are going to be hosting the authors of a book called Shivers, The Pirate Who's Afraid of Everything. Some of you all might be aware of this series. Annabeth Bonderstone and Connor White are both originally from Albuquerque, and their new book is, I believe it's also with HarperCollins. They've got a few books in that series, also really fun, funny, middle grade fiction. Louis, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else you want to say to these 100-some people who adore you and your books?
Well, thank you for tuning in, and I hope this is my first virtual chat, so I hope it went well, and hope you like the new book.
All right.